Good morning, everyone. So it looks like we have about 40 people on so far who have registered. We have about 67 people registered in total. So this morning, we're going to have our second Lodi Water Management Workshop hosted by the Lodi Winegrape Commission, along with a bunch of great UC experts. And this will go until about 11:50 a.m. We're so happy that you joined us for today's workshop. If you missed our first workshop, you can go to lodigrowers.com, and if you click on the blog that was posted on Monday, then you will see where you can watch the recording of our first water management workshop. And there will be a third workshop in the series on May 13th, and we'll post the agenda for that soon. The information for that is already up, and you can go ahead and register for that workshop at lodigrowers.com. If you click on the calendar, and if you click on the event date of May 13th, you can go ahead and register for the third workshop. You do need to register separately. We're offering 2.5 hours of nitrogen management plan units for today's workshop. And the way that you can get your certificate for that is if you had told us when you registered that you needed nitrogen management plan units, then within 5 business days, we'll email you that certificate. If you didn't tell us that you needed the credits and you realize afterwards that you need them, go ahead and send an email to info@lodiwine.com and just say you attended the second nitrogen management plan or water workshop for nitrogen management plan credits and that you want that certificate. We do have a questions box. This is a little bit different than Zoom. This platform is called GoToWebinar. In the questions box, you can interact with any of the people you see on the screen right now, so the panelists and myself. You can interact with us. The rest of the audience won't see your questions, and we can't hear or see you right now either. So in the questions box, to make sure we know you're here and to get used to using that function, I want you to go ahead and type in, what's your favorite body of water in California or on the West Coast? What's your favorite body of water? I want you to give us some good ideas of where to take some road trips. Go ahead and type that in the questions box right now. We'll make sure that you know how to use it. If you have any technical difficulties during this webinar, you can call the Lodi Winegrape Commission office, and Gabriella, our great admin assistant, she can help you work through those. There is a handout listed in the handout part of the GoToWebinar dashboard, and that has the agenda for today. It's a tentative agenda. We're going to do our best to stay on schedule, giving you a break around 10 a.m. if you need to make a quick phone call, etc. And then we're going to end at 11:50 a.m. today. Okay, I think I covered all of the logistics and intro details, and my name is Stephanie Bolton. I am the Grower Research and Education Director and the Lodi Rules Sustainable Wine Growing Director for the Lodi Winegrape Commission. We have a fantastic panel of UC experts here to share with you some practical water management strategies for vineyards, practical tips, some good takeaways. And we've just been really impressed with how quickly they were able to come together to create this workshop. And this all is the brainchild of grower John Shin, who I'm going to pass it over to now. You can read more about the story of how those workshops came together at lodigrowers.com and under Monday's blog. But John, take it away and let us know why you dreamt this up and why you think it's so needed and so important. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Stephanie. My name's John Shin, 6th generation grower in Lodi. We do primarily wine grapes now, although we've grown a lot of different things in the past. The reason why this came about is it's just an overall need to manage our water better. I mean, I think we touched a lot on it last week, that water is one of the most important things that we need to grow any commodity in anywhere. And it's also one of the most important things we need to live. In fact, it's the most important thing I think we need to live. So there's a lot of competition for it, especially in this state. And as growers, we need to do the best we can to utilize our resources in the best way possible. So one of the things that goes with that is our Lodi Rules sustainability program. run by the commission, and Stephanie's in charge of that. And one of the sections in that is the water management and especially irrigation management. So I attended a webinar, a series of recorded webinars for nitrogen management credit earlier this year, and it was mostly for trees and nuts and the North Valley. So a lot of the same kind of information, but I thought, hey, we need something specific for our area. The climate's different, the soils are different, the commodities different. And so I put it out to Stephanie, and she got together with all these panelists, and they got this thing together so fast. Like I said last time, my head's kind of still spinning by the amount of information you guys got together in such a short period of time. So thank you all again so much for your help and your willingness to be involved in this. I know it's time out of busy schedules, but this is an important topic that's only going to get more important. I mean, we're supposed to get a little bit of rain today, but I think it's a literal drop in the bucket for what we need. So if anybody hasn't started irrigating yet this year, I have a feeling that pumps are going to get fired up pretty soon. So today, hopefully, we're going to get into a little bit more information on how we should look at our irrigation practices, and I know the first topic today is looking at strategies. You know, we irrigate. Some people just say, well, I turn the pump on, I turn it off, I put so much water on because that's what my neighbor does. But I think in reality, we really do have to pay a lot more attention as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. So I know last time there was a lot of information that was put out there. Some of it might have been over our heads, but I think everybody's going to start breaking it down into bite-sized chunks for us now to put it into some applicable situations for our vineyards. And I know I took a lot of notes last time, and I think I'm going to take a lot more this time and start to digest this stuff so that we can really get together some amazing water management strategies and irrigation strategies to, again, put Lodi area growers at the forefront of viticulture in our industry. So on that note, I would like to introduce Dr. Mark Batney. I hope I get that name right. He's advisor, UC Extension advisor in the San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. Very, very nice place to live, actually. I'm kind of a little jealous. But he's going to talk about what we aim to achieve with irrigation, what irrigation strategy to follow with grapevine. So again, not just putting water on for the sake of putting water on, but why are we doing it and what are some good ways to do it? So take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John. And let me see if I can get to my screen here. So this is kind of a very basic conceptual talk here about what we're trying to achieve with irrigation in our vineyards. And you know, the concepts can be applied anywhere. This is pretty much global in nature. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are at, we're really trying to achieve often very similar things. So our basic irrigation strategy for grapes here, bud break through fruit set. Our goal here is to have very rapid foliage growth, very successful flowering and fruit set, and then also, very importantly, we want to have good conditions for bud development for the following season. So this is all this very first part of our irrigation and vine growth season. The second part here, post fruit set through veraison. So when I say post fruit set, we mean from a very small berry size, let's say a small BB size through veraison. This is when we apply water stress. We want to have some water stress periods here for the purpose of slowing the vegetative growth, and in doing so to achieve our balanced canopy that we would like. And our final part of our strategy here, from veraison through harvest, we want to maintain leaf function to be able to ripen the fruit. So all three of these periods have very different vine water stress situations in order to achieve these outcomes. This is just one example of a strategy. Now there may be more complicated strategies that people might want to employ, but this is sort of the basics that we need to be able to produce a functional and productive vineyard. Now, As I mentioned, a lot of this information is universal and global, and I got some examples that I use in some of my work here from work that's been done in Eastern Washington. And before you think that that is not applicable, I would argue that it very much is for much of California, just because they have very similar, very dry conditions, and they are an irrigation dependent region, just the same way that we are. So the concepts are similar, but of course we need to fine tune by any region and for our particular soils and particular climates and varieties that we're growing, and more importantly, our specific production goals, whether we're trying to produce a high tonnage crop per acre or a much lower tonnage crop per acre. So the reality is that our site-to-site variability in management is probably going to be much bigger than our regional variability in many ways. So that's always something to keep in mind. The individual site needs kind of trump all in many ways. So what I liked from their presentation was how they made very simple graphics for comparing the canopy over the season and delineating then these different periods of our different irrigation strategies. So if we just look at that green line here, that's the canopy size over the season from bud break until harvest here. We can divide this into those same 3 periods that I mentioned before. So from bud break up into flowering or fruit set, our goal here is to have maximum growth. In that early part of that curve, we want to achieve a functional canopy as quickly as we can, because any delays or setbacks in growth of the canopy during this time will be very difficult or impossible to make up later in the season. You know, it's the same way that you are told to start investing for your retirement when you're young, because if you don't do that, it's very hard to set aside enough savings if you start investing when you're 64. So it's the same idea. We want to develop this canopy early, as early as we can, and have non-water stressed plant tissues for successful flowering and fruit set. The second part here, where we slow down the growth to achieve the desired canopy size, this is when we're applying water stress to slow down that growth. That's our only tool that we have really to slow that down, and it's a very effective tool. But we're going from a very rapid growth period now into a much slower growth period, so that can present some challenges to be able to make that happen. The final phase here, where we just want to maintain functional foliage. So this is a period of moderate stress. We want to have that foliage continuing to photosynthesize to be able to make the sugars that we need to ripen our fruit. But what we don't want to do is spur on new foliage growth, because then that takes away from our desired balanced canopy, and we're directing resources into producing foliage rather than into ripening the fruit that we want. So it's a very simple program like this, but again, these 3 periods that I'm delineating, each of these periods has a different water stress component to it in order to achieve this. If you want to have another way of looking at these 3 periods, kind of an automotive analogy here, during this first phase from bud break up into flowering and fruit set, basically we have the gas pedal floored as far as encouraging vegetative growth through irrigation if necessary. The second period, hitting the brakes, that's where we're really trying to slow down the growth of that canopy, and we achieve that again by water stress. Then the last portion, this is the easy cruise. Now we're not totally letting up on the gas, but we're not flooring it either. We're just trying to maintain the function of what we have through that final period. So just some examples of what this might look like in the field. Now I have pictures here from a variety of different production systems, but focus on the basic concepts here because again, they are universal. So this is a table grape vineyard in my area in the spring. And what I like about this picture is that it shows very clearly the focus on rapid vegetative growth in the first part of the season here. If you look at those shoot tips, those are happy shoot tips. They're growing vigorously, happy vines growing very strongly. And if you look at that little inset chart that I have on the lower right, I've highlighted the area on that first part from bud break to flowering where that line kind of matches here. So we're maximizing the growth of that canopy. Now, we also need to mention, you all know that this growth that you achieve during this period, it's a function of more than just irrigation. There's a nutritional component, making sure we have enough nutrients, especially nitrogen, present to produce this amount of vegetation. Other important components, the vineyard floor management, keeping it weed-free enough so that there's no competition for these vines. So all these things come together. You know, irrigation is one important component of making that happen, but there's a whole suite of practices that we need for that. That doesn't always happen, though. Here's an example from a vineyard. This is in my region here, where during this early spring period, where you can see right now those vines are around a flowering period, look at the shoot tips. Those shoot tips are pretty much have stopped growing. So these vines were extremely stressed during this early growth period. You can see that they produced very, very little vegetative growth here. They didn't even make it up to that very first fruiting wire in this example here. And now they're going to be stunted for the rest of the season. They won't have enough vegetative leaf area here to be able to ripen the fruit that may sit on those vines. So this has really handicapped this vineyard. Now, why did this happen in this situation? Well, this was a vineyard towards the tail end of the last drought. So we had the effects of drier and drier soils over time, and irrigation did not compensate well enough for that. A second factor was they had a pretty late growing cover crop, even during a drought year. And that cover crop used quite a bit of water at this site, which they probably didn't compensate for well enough. A third factor was salts at this site. The water quality here, the EC of this water was about 2.5 decisiemens. That's a salty water to be using to irrigate a vineyard. So it added another stress factor that this combination of things really led to very poor growth here. So again, this is what we're trying to avoid happening, but it can happen in many sites if we're not aware of what our conditions are like. Now if we move on to that middle phase here, this period from, actually I'm combining two here. The second and third phases, when we slow down the canopy growth with water stress and try to maintain the function of that canopy through harvest here. This is not the type of trellis systems that we typically use in our wine grape vineyards here in California, but I really like this picture because it shows very clearly how this vineyard has maintained a balance in the vegetative growth with respect to their fruit, and have resulted in having a vineyard canopy that has good ventilation, adequate light penetration. Really, they've achieved that by managing irrigation to not encourage too much growth here. So the idea of this, we can apply to any different trellis system, to have a target of how much vegetative growth we're trying to achieve, but then just to maintain that through our water stress applications here to the site. But even that, we don't always achieve. Now here's another example of a vineyard in another country where irrigation and combination with nitrogen, excessive amounts of both, led to this canopy, which was a total disaster for this site. Compared to that previous slide, you can see there's almost no light penetration. That tells you how dense the foliage was in this site. Those conditions led to high humidity, poor ventilation, poor air circulation, resulting in a complete loss of crop due to powdery mildew at this site. So this was completely irrigation and nutrient related to produce this. Far, far too much of both were applied. And on my chart on the lower right there, you can see how I would graph that instead of slowing down that vegetative growth like we wanted to after fruit set, they just kept the gas pedal forward and continued producing more and more foliage to the detriment of the site. So too much of a good thing. However, here in California, and this is a photo from my region, we are a region that does need to have irrigation to maintain foliage. So we can err on the other side. of thinking that, well, once we produce that canopy, that maybe then we can just cut back on irrigation completely. Well, if we do that in many areas, this is what we're going to end up with. Total defoliation of the vines, and therefore we lose all of that productive capacity of generating sugars to ripen the fruit. And of course, now we're exposing our fruit to sunburn and other maladies here. So again, there's a need to, once we grow that canopy, then to make sure that we maintain it in a functional state here and not apply such a severe stress that we then lose that function here. So another way to look at that over the season here is that during this period, bud break to flowering, that's our lowest stress. For example, if you're out there with a pressure chamber, which we'll have a presentation later about that, this is where you would get your lowest water stress readings during that period, because you want the vines to be growing strongly. After fruit set until veraison, this is often where we apply our highest degree of water stress, because we are trying to slow down that growth rate as quickly and as strongly as we can. But then once we achieve that balanced canopy, then we apply our moderate water stress for the remainder of the season, because we want to maintain function in that canopy. We want to make sure those leaves continue to operate and ripen our fruit for us. So what kinds of challenges do we face with trying to achieve this success? Well, our principal problem or challenge that we face is that the amount of rainfall we get from year to year is not the same. And why that's important, because when your vines begin growing in the spring at bud break, you may not have the same amount of stored soil moisture from one year to the next, which makes it very difficult to know how much fuel you have in the tank for these vines to make their growth. This is also compounded by the year-over-year effects. And what I mean is that when we have multiple years of drought, for example, in sequence, that by the end of that period, that deeper subsoil can be extremely dry. But it took a number of years to reach that extreme dryness. So we can't really just look at how much rain we got the year before and understand how much moisture we have in the soil. We really need to look at a longer time period oftentimes to understand that. And that's why that earlier picture that I showed you during the spring period, where those grapevines did not make very much growth and bloom, that was clearly a consequence of year-over-year effects that led to that happening. And the last challenge with this rainfall and soil moisture storage, it's very difficult for us to measure how much moisture is in the entire root zone. You know, when you're using a soil moisture sensor, typically we place them in the upper part of the soil. That's the most active root zone, so that data is very useful for us. But we're often not measuring down at 5, 6, or 7 feet, where that is still an important reserve of moisture for our vines. So that's something that is always going to be a bit of a challenge for us to understand. Now, just to kind of graphically look at this relationship between how much rainfall we receive in a winter and then how much irrigation we apply the following season here, I'm just showing you some data from some measurements that I did in Paso Robles as part of an irrigation survey. But this information is actually applicable to many parts of California and elsewhere in the world where we're growing similar style wine grapes. So each of those 4 dots, okay, thanks, Stephanie. Each of those 4 dots represents the annual amount of irrigation applied in a growing season over 4 separate years. So you can see the pattern. So the years when there was a larger amount of rainfall in the winter prior to a growing season, they applied less irrigation. And then as the seasons were drier, then they applied far more irrigation. Now, if we extrapolate that relationship to the right, that line is probably fairly representative of conditions that would be experienced, say, in Napa and then Sonoma and then Mendocino as regions of California that receive more rainfall. Now, your region tends to receive even less rainfall than many of our regions in California, so you're going to be on the left side of that curve. But now the caveat here is that these numbers may not match what you do in practice, because these represent a certain style of growing the grapes that may have fairly limited production. When you look at our average tonnages, for example, in San Luis Obispo County, we're at about 3.5 tons per acre of fruit. That's not a lot of production. So if you have a higher producing vineyard, clearly you're going to need a larger canopy, which has to be irrigated with more water. So your particular function here is just going to be a line that's a bit higher up for that style of production. But the concept is the same here, that I think a lot of us understand this, but sometimes it's good to see this in a clear relationship like this, that the less rainfall we get, we need to increase irrigation to make up for that. If we don't do that, then we have problems. Then the question is, well, okay, so we need to irrigate more during these winters when we don't receive rainfall. When do we apply that irrigation? Well, my suggestion to you is that don't wait until June and July thinking that you need to irrigate more then. We want to make sure that that early vine growth is not facing any delays, any hindrance, any obstacles. We want to make sure we get that water on early so that that vine can make its early growth with as much success as possible. So in this example here, clearly irrigating well before the vines are growing, and I would recommend that you definitely consider doing that. You know, a lot of the growers that I work with, they basically look at each month in the winter and say, well, if we don't get rainfall, they're going to irrigate even during those months to make up for it. So they're irrigating fairly early in anticipation of springtime. So it's not something that we want to delay. So this is an issue that I deal with a lot here as far as what I see as a challenge to success just in basic irrigation management. Something that maybe we don't talk about very much, but you know, here in the US, we use our imperial units, you know, our feet and gallons and inches. When we manage water with these units, it really makes it hard for us as growers to do the basic calculations that we need to figure out, for example, if I tell you that the weekly reference evapotranspiration was 1.5 inch, how do you convert that into gallons per vine? That's a really big obstacle oftentimes for many people, and it's an impediment to using some of this data. Water management is one thing where adopting and using the metric system would make your life far, far easier. And there's the reason why, because there's a very simple relationship between the volume in liters, the area in square meters, and the depth of water in millimeters. And that is that if you take 1 liter of water and put it over an area of 1 square meter, that has a depth of 1 millimeter. So that relationship between a volume of water and a depth of water over a surface is simple and easy to calculate. Imagine if I asked all of you here watching this seminar, if you take 1 quart of water and put it over 1 square yard, how deep is that in inches? I don't know what that answer is, and it would take a lot of work to figure that out. But if you use these metric units, it's easy to do. So this is something I would really encourage you to explore a little bit. Again, it'll make your life and calculations much, much easier to do this. So in summary, you know, our basic goals with irrigation are very simple. We want to achieve that strong early growth to develop the canopy and to set fruit. We do that with low water stress conditions. Once that canopy, we've developed it, we need to slow down that growth to achieve our desired balanced canopy. And that's what that desired balanced canopy is different based on your production goals, but you clearly have something in mind that is your ideal. So we achieve that through water management. But then finally, maintain that functional canopy through harvest. So avoid putting too much water and nutrients on. You don't want to encourage growth, but also avoid excessive stress that will either slow down the function of that canopy or cause you to lose it. And with that, Stephanie, I think I've reached the end of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Batney. I think you really set the stage very well with that presentation, and I appreciate you keeping it in language that we all can understand. I really enjoyed that. So next up, we've got Dr. Daniele Zachariah. He's been the ringleader for these meetings, and he's the Ag Water Management Specialist for UC Davis. And he's going to be talking to us about technologies and tools for vineyard irrigation.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. I hope you can see my screen. I prepare also a presentation which is kind of general in scope, and it can be applied to any different crop, but specifically to specialty crop that have high value. The first thing that I would like to focus on is what do we mean for irrigation scheduling? And irrigation scheduling is a complex of activities that provide answer to three main questions. So the first one is when to irrigate our crops, and the normal answer that we get from the old school books are, so we have to irrigate our crops before the plant face water deficit. But there are a lot of crops in California and elsewhere that somehow benefit from some mild or a moderate stress in specific time of their crop cycle, and this is beneficial for yield and quality. So the answer, the more complicated answer would be that we have to irrigate our crop at specific deficit levels that are beneficial for fruit yield and quality. The second question I want to answer is how much water to apply. And again, there's an old school that say that we have to apply the amount of water that is consumptively used by the crop for evapotranspiration since the last irrigation or rainfall events. And this is generically valid for mostly the field crop. But when we come to high value crop, then we probably need to apply a portion of that evapotranspiration maximum that enables to maintain a certain target level of water stress. And this is for mainly for high value specialty crops. The third question I want to answer is how to best apply the necessary amount of water that we somehow calculated. And there are various options here depending on the site specific condition. We can apply water uniformly or site specifically based on the spatial variability of the canopy or the soil properties. We can apply water in frequent light application or with infrequent deep application, and this is somehow part of the irrigation strategy we decided at the beginning of the year. We can also choose to use an application rate and volumes that are compatible with the soil infiltration rate and water holding capacity or site-specific condition, but also there are places in California where this is already possible, so that we apply water with application rate and volumes that are somehow allowing us to minimize the energy cost. And so this is in compliance with specific energy rate or time of use or specific tiered energy pricing. Now, we got different, basically three main methods for irrigation scheduling. The first one is weather-based or ET, evapotranspiration based. The second type is soil moisture based, and the third one is plant based. They also have different combination of the three, and so basically the methods are, I would say the main methods are four.
Hi, everyone. So it looks like the presentation has frozen for Daniele. So if you could just type in the questions box to see if you can hear me now, yes or no. Okay, great. So I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. May Columber. She's the UC Fresno advisor, and she's going to talk about measuring vine water status using leaf and water stem potential. And then we'll turn it back to Daniele so he can finish his presentation. So just give me a second here to switch it over to Dr. Columber. Thank you for sticking with us. And Dr. Columber, you can take it away.
Okay, can you, let's see, I need to show my screen here.
We can see you and we can hear you.
And you can see my screen?
We can, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you for the invitation to talk, and I'll just jump right in. I think that this is a nice, I'm hoping to give a nice continuation of the great overview that Mark Batney gave to understanding plant-water relations, or vine-water relations. And so I'm going to talk about how we monitor vine water status. Okay, so just an outline of what I'm going to go over. First, we'll talk about how water moves through vines, and then what some of the physiological impacts are of water stress. And then looking at leaf and vine water status, where and what to sample in your vineyard, how to use a pressure chamber, and then interpreting these results to apply a deficit. Okay, so when plants, they need to regulate gas exchange through and transpiration through what we call stomata. And so that is the plant organs that the plant uses for transpiration. And so these organs are found on the leaf surface, and when they're open, as you can see on the electron graph on the right, CO2 assimilation is increased, as well as water exchange. And so when closed, like on the left, transpiration, photosynthesis, and gas exchange is decreased. And if these stomata are closed for a prolonged period of time, the cellular function of the plants can be damaged. And so this explains why it's important to monitor plant water status of your vines to ensure that they can achieve optimal growth and yield. Okay, so the water status of your plants is measured in terms of what's called water potential. And this is expressed in pressure units in bars or megapascals. The example here are in megapascals. I'll talk about both throughout this talk. And so with water potential, we need to understand that water moves spontaneously down a gradient from levels of high potential to low potential, releasing energy as it goes, and moving water. Well-watered plants and soil with high moisture content are said to have a high water status. And when plants or the soil dries down, these conditions lead to low water status. So as the vine or the soil becomes drier, it has a lower water status, meaning the value becomes more negative. If it becomes wetter, it becomes less negative. But this value will never become positive. You'll never get greater than 0. And just to illustrate how that would work in the vineyard, this example shows when water status in the soil is high, it's close to zero megapascals. And as it moves into the roots, through the stem and into the canopy and out through the atmosphere, it becomes increasingly negative. Okay, and then earlier I mentioned the stomates. So the stomates in the leaves. Okay, now when there's adequate a turgor in those stomates, the stomates are open, and water vapor passively diffuses out of this cavity inside the leaf. Okay, and so this is due to the fact that there's this large water potential between the inside of the leaf, where there's relative humidity is 100%, and the atmosphere, where relative humidity is significantly lower. So it's that same principle that we're going from areas of high water potential to areas of low water potential. And so the water that's lost from this cavity inside the leaf has to be replaced. And so this cavity will draw water from the cells surrounding that cavity. And in turn, the water that's lost from these cells needs to be replaced from water in other nearby leaf cells, and eventually, ultimately from the leaf xylem that is connected to the petioles, the stems, the roots, to the soil, and forth. So you can see the connectivity of water flow through the vines. Okay, so plant growth is a physiological process that's sensitive to water deficits, as Mark mentioned. And so in well-water plants, there's plenty of resources. As I mentioned, those stomates assimilate carbon dioxide that's needed for photosynthesis, protein synthesis, cell wall expansion, everything that's needed for the growth and development of the vines. But as water potential decreases and the plants come under mild to severe water stress, we begin to see decreases in those functions. And so the various vegetative organs in vines, they differ in their sensitivity. And here that we can see that as water potential decreases, as we can see on the horizontal axis going left to right, as water potential decreases, as the plant gets drier, the leaves, shoot tips, and tendrils, they respond differently. And so the slopes of each one of these lines indicate how sensitive the different organs are. The leaves and shoots are about the same, but tendrils are very sensitive, and they're sensitive and they dry down much more quickly. And then where these lines would cross this horizontal line is the point where these organs stop growing. So in this example, you get probably around 9 megapascals, or about 9 bars. You begin to see leaf growth drop off. Around 1.2 megapascals or 12 bars in the example for shoots, and then maybe close to that for the tendrils as well. Okay, but even though we see these vegetative decreases in response to water stress, that doesn't necessarily equivalate to the same response in yield. And so this graph is showing, if we reduce our water application from a 100% ET, we see a more drastic, on the x-axis, we have reductions in ET. But then if we're looking at pruning weights, we really see a dramatic reduction as we move down from 100% ET, but yields don't really follow that same curve. So yield saturates at approximately 60% ET. So you're going to get the same yield at 60% up to 100. So to summarize that, moderate water deficits control the expansive vegetative growth, but photosynthesis is allowed to continue. And this is sort of the basis for that concept of regulated deficit irrigation. And we're going to talk about how to use those plant water status tools in connection with that. And so you may remember last series we talked about understanding anomalies or differences in your individual field. And so this is going to inform us as to where we want to do our sampling to understand plant water status. And so if we have a field with two different textures of soil, maybe a sandy loam and a fine sandy loam, we're going to have different levels of soil moisture water holding capacity. Okay, and so we're going to see a quicker change in the soil water status in say a sandy loam compared to a fine sandy loam. And so we're going to look at taking roughly 4 to 6 samples per 15-acre site, but we're going to do more if there's different soil types. And we're going to take care to make sure that we're sampling from the same healthy vines each sampling. So where and what to sample. And so in this case, we would not want to be sampling on the edge of a field by the road, and we don't want to, if we do have areas where are problematic, it's important to do what we can to address whatever issues may be causing leaf senescence in this area. But if we want a representative water status of vines in the field, we want to look for the healthiest, most vigorous plants to take that example from. Okay, so we're going to look at midday leaf water potential using a pressure chamber to measure that tension that I mentioned in the leaf. And tension is expressed as a negative value since you are measuring tension in the xylem. Okay, so using a pressure chamber, and this is one example of something that's commercially available. It's the PMS pressure chamber, and so it has this chamber where you will insert the leaf and a pressure gauge from where you get your readings. And usually these the units in these that I'm familiar with are expressed in bars. So earlier I was talking about everything in terms of megapascals, but I'll also reference bars. And so the way this works is that you need to sample your leaves about 1 half hour before or after solar noon. So that would be somewhere around 1 o'clock. And depending on if you're doing leaf water potential or stem water potential, the method may vary a little bit in terms of where in the canopy you're selecting a leaf. But for leaf water potential, we want to bag a fully expanded and exposed leaf on the canopy. And then we're going to cut the petiole of that leaf with a sharp razor as close to the stem as possible. So this little diagram shows cutting that with a razor blade, and you can see the cut that's made through the petiole, exposing the xylem. And then we're going to, as quickly as possible, place that leaf in the chamber with the cut edge of the petiole outside the chamber. And so here's another little schematic showing the leaf in the chamber. And so now we're going to seal the chamber, and we're going to slowly begin increasing pressure by opening the compressed nitrogen valve. A lot of these chambers usually use compressed nitrogen. Some others may use CO2. So it's a good idea to begin pressurization slowly. The pressure is going to increase to about 8 to 10 bars per minute, and then even slower as the trigger point approaches. So I would say usually I would recommend bringing that pressure up to 5 slowly, and then really dialing it back and increasing the pressure at an even slower rate, so that we can pinpoint that point where the pressure in the chamber is equal to the pressure in the leaves. And so we're looking for that point when water exudes from the petiole, and that's when we want to turn the valve off that's releasing pressure into the chamber, and that is going to provide us with the value that tells us how much tension the leaf is under. Okay, so in general, interpreting results, a reading of -10 bars or 1 megapascal would indicate that you have no water stress. So 10 or higher, meaning going towards 0, no water stress. If you have a reading of a -10 bars or more negative, that's going to indicate that you have water stress in the plant. Okay, so and just in general, if you're out sampling frequently throughout the season, you are going to see that the vine water status does decline over the course of the entire growing season, regardless of your irrigation treatment, whether you're doing deficit irrigation or just a standard irrigation following 100% ET. So here you can see that this line with the boxes with the shaded box inside, this has been deficit irrigated. So you see a much more rapid decrease in water potential, even early on in the season, going down. So the effect is much more pronounced in vines that are being deficit irrigated. Okay, if you're interpreting this leaf water potential for targeting deficit irrigation, it's important to know that moderate water deficits, they can control that expansive vegetative growth, but still allow photosynthesis to continue unabated as long as we're not inflicting too much stress on the vines.
5 minutes.
And did you say
5
something?
minutes.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm almost done. Okay, and then withholding irrigation until the vines have reached deficit irrigation entails withholding irrigation until the vines have reached that predetermined threshold for leaf water potential. And so the objective here would be, we know that we're applying a deficit with irrigation, but we know how much water we've applied. But this allows us to understand what the response has been to the plant. Okay, and so an example of a threshold, a predetermined threshold, could be 10 bars for some whites, to as much as 15 to 16 bars in some red cultivars. But this threshold is going to vary by cultivar, rootstock, your soil water holding capacity, your trellising system, etc. And so I actually had a few more slides, but I I guess I think that they're hidden. But I guess that basically concludes it, is that you can use this deficit irrigation, you can use leaf water potential to fine tune your deficit irrigation and make sure that you're in that target range without causing too much stress. And I was just going to go on to say that generally speaking, this deficit irrigation time is best done in that pre-veraison period of the grape development. So with that, if there's any time for questions, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cullenberg. I think we're going to save all the question time for at the end, but we appreciate you keeping that in a tight, short time frame so we can still have as much of our break as we can with our technical difficulties. Thank you very much. Okay. So next up, we've got Dr. Daniele is going to finish up his presentation here. So I'm going to make you the presenter, and we'll give you the rest of the time until the break to finish up, and we might go a few minutes into the break, but we'll still make sure we give everybody some break time.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry, I got all my connection lost, and I'm trying to take it from where I left. I think the last slide that I was trying to show is this one. And so the 3 different type of irrigation scheduling method that are somehow based on weather soil moisture monitoring, and plant-based. And I was saying that the weather-based or ET-based utilize estimated crop ET, and somehow this is a very common method for many field crops and some specialty crops in California, but requires some data and calculation by growers or by the irrigation consultant. The soil-based, soil moisture-based rely on assessment of soil water status, and is somehow equipment intensive in the field, and but it's also good for checking periodically on when we use other irrigation scheduling method as a feedback. The third method is a plant-based, is what May has talked about, and somehow rely on detection of plant water status. It's labor intensive in most of the cases, and is well developed for some of the crops, but not for all the crops. In all cases, all irrigation scheduling methods somehow required skilled on-farm operators and personnel, but also the capacity to troubleshoot equipment that we have deployed in the field, and also in the irrigation system. Now, when moving to the weather or ET-based irrigation scheduling, this is the first method that I was indicating in my previous slide. The basic criterion is to replenish the water amount consumptively used because of soil evaporation and crop transpiration since the last irrigation or rainfall event. And in California, we estimate the crop water use, or ETC, as a product of reference evapotranspiration, which is related to grass, and crop coefficient. Now, this is a basic equation that we normally use. ETC is equal reference ET multiplied by crop coefficient. Now, when we do our calculation, we can use historical ET average, and it could be historical reference ET and crop coefficient values, or historical values of crop evapotranspiration. We can use real-time reference ET and crop coefficient values, or you can use forecast of reference ET, so moving into the next periods or moving into the next week. But again, we need reliable values of crop coefficient. So in all the three methods, the three way of applying this method, having accurate crop coefficient values is really crucial for our calculation. I'm going to focus a little bit on real time and forecast ET, because the first, using the historical ET average is mainly for water resources planning and allocation purposes at the district level. Now, here again is the basic equation. Reference ET, we can get the information from the network of CIMIS in California, which relies on about 150 automated weather stations spread out throughout California, the state of California. But also CIMIS has a new product that is called Spatial CIMIS. And so if we at any time we can connect to this free service and get the reference ETs or grass ET information for the areas of our farm. Then we should rely on reliable crop coefficient. In UCANR manual, their crop coefficient that are available for different crops. This is the somehow related to a few decades ago, but here in the wine grape column, we got the crop coefficient determined by our predecessor, Terry Pritchard and Larry Schwanko I think in the Fresno area. And here's a curve of the crop coefficient for the that relates to that table. And when we want to move into prospective irrigation scheduling, here is the service provided in the National Weather Service for most of the continental United States, where you can get information of the next few days, up to 7 days. So this is the forecast ET, is called FRET, is forecast ET up to 7 days ahead. And so when we want to plan or order water from a water district, we can use this FRET forecast ET, and we use somehow values the crop coefficient in order to quantify the amount of water that we're going to need for the next week, for the next 7 days. Drawbacks of the ET-based scheduling is that if we schedule information, if we schedule irrigation based on ETC, estimated with generalized crop coefficient value, like the table that I showed, this might be quite different with respect to our site-specific vineyards in the site-specific condition, because you know, we're using generalized crop coefficient, but you know, we don't exactly know whether our crop is similar to the vineyard where this crop coefficient were determined. So we run the risk of over-irrigation or under-irrigation. I have to say that most of the available crop coefficient information in California were developed during the 80s and 90s with under infrequent irrigation method, either sprinkler or surface irrigation, and were developed for well-drained soils and flat grounds, and were developed for crop varieties, rootstock densities of planting, and canopy management. They were very common in the past, but now they are different from the current ones. And overall, you know, the previous farming system for which this crop coefficient were determined were conducive to much lower yield or to different quality. And so now most of the wine grapes in California is on micro irrigation, and micro irrigation really is a game changer. And so this allows to spoon feed water and nutrient to crops. And so we are re-evaluating the crop coefficient for research purposes for wine grapes in California through a grant somehow where the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has provided the funds. And what I have to say is that looking only at ET for scheduling irrigation might be limiting for high-value specialty crop, because it's always, you know, the amount of water that our vineyard use is always a combination of the weather, the trellis system, and the soil site-specific situation. So we need to look also the plant and the soil. An alternative, we can measure ET of our site-specific condition, or the actual ET, and we can schedule to replenish that water that our vineyard has consumed. Here's a few pictures of measurement of ET for research purposes, but we also have some commercial device that can be deployed in the field and give you a sense of how much water, how much actual ET is your crop consuming. And you got here the Thule system, the arable mark, and some other devices that are called atmometer. They're very common in Colorado, other states for field crop like corn. But you know, I'm not endorsing any of this device. I'm just saying that they're available on the market. They can guide you in the irrigation scheduling based on measured ET in your site-specific condition. Moving to the second method, this is soil moisture-based irrigation schedule, and what you do, you basically observe the soil moisture frequently or monitor it in continuous, and then you start irrigation at some target level of soil moisture or target level of the threshold or allowable negative tension, not to create any stress. And then stop irrigation when the soil moisture reach some other target level. Here's a graph that is based on 3 level watermarks, one at 12-inch, the other one at 24-inch, and the other one at 48-inch, and it can show you the variation of the soil moisture tension in the soil. Now, the soil moisture monitoring system normally helps answering the following questions: when to start irrigation and when to stop it, based on the wetness of the soil, and whether there's enough water infiltrate the root zone during an irrigation, whether we are applying with our system sufficient water or insufficient or too much. And specifically for some crop that benefit from a water deficit, we also can answer this type of question. So whether there's a deep soil reserve for crop water that the crop can take during periods of irrigation suspension. And the irrigation suspension can be during harvest or during leaf out or during bud break, so when no irrigation occurs. So we want to make sure there's enough water to feed the crop water requirement. Soil moisture. All right, soil moisture can be measured in terms of content in percentage or in depth, but also I'm going to skip this because I have more interesting information to share with you. Or in terms of soil moisture tension, and the soil moisture tension is pretty intuitive and tells how strongly water is held by the soil particle. The higher the tension, the drier the soil, and the more difficult it is for plant to uptake water. And these are just a few figures that will show you how the soil moisture tension works. This is a figure with a specific application of the watermark soil moisture tension meter. This is an application that we did in the Sierra foothills with the first sensor at 12 inches, the second sensor at 24. The third was scheduled at 36, but we can now reach the 36 inches because of the rocks layer. And so we somehow got by with 12 and 24 inches because the rest was fractured rock. Here is some recommended value of soil moisture content to where irrigation should occur for not creating any water stress. And for the different type of soil, on the left, the table shows soil moisture content. On the right, soil moisture tension value that indicate where we should start irrigation in the different type of soil. This is a picture of watermarks and data logger in the field, and on the right is a tensiometer. Now, with micro irrigation, there are some problems though, because you can have soils that are not homogeneous. If you can see here in the picture, there might be some preferential flow. And so one of the challenges, as Mark Bathany pointed out, is that the area sensed by this soil moisture sensor is pretty small. So really, we can have some false information if we happen to install some of the sensor in area that are not wet by normal irrigation like this case. But anyway, so moisture can be used as a feedback for information for after irrigation. The other method, and May has already talked about this, is to monitor plant water status. It could be a stand or leaf water potential, it could be sap flow, or it could be through canopy temperature. Here's some picture of also some other devices that are available on the market, like dendrometers, canopy infrared thermometer, and leaf turgor sensor that we were somehow testing for some companies in the past. What I would suggest for high value crop, and this is my last slide, is to use a combination of the different approach. If really want to target some fruit quality and tonnage, to use the plant-based methods or monitor the plant water status to define the right, the proper irrigation timing, then use weather-based through CIMIS and crop coefficient, or measuring the site-specific actual evapotranspiration of a crop to decide the exact amount of water to apply, and then to use a soil base as a feedback after the irrigation. And also somehow we have other devices that help with irrigation scheduling, and this is a flow meter that should not be missing in any micro irrigation system. So we can use the soil base and the flow meter in order to see whether we are applying the scheduled amount of water. With this, I'll stop so I don't take any other time, and I'm sorry again for my disconnection before. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniele. That was great, and I really appreciate you figuring your internet out really quickly and coming back to us. That was we have to work on the fly these days. So we do have a 10-minute break right now. We will start right back at 10:20 a.m. on the dot with Dr. Con Curterall. I'm going to add some handouts. One handout is going to be from Dr. Daniele I'll add that to our GoToWebinar, and I'll also add a tip that came in from Larry Whitted. Enjoy your break, and we'll be back soon.
Hello? I'm back.
Hi, Con, you made it back. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking me away from a scintillating meeting.
Anytime. I'm going to make you the presenter now, okay?
Okay, let me get my screen. Okay, it's okay, right?
It looks great. Yeah, as soon as you click on slideshow, then we'll be able to see it. There you go. Yep, perfect.
All righty.
Okay, were you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good break. Next up, we have Dr. Con Curterall, who's the viticultural specialist for UC Davis, and he's going to talk to us about water management considerations for optimizing yield and quality under both full and limited water supply. So it'll really tie together some of the stuff we've learned earlier this morning. Thank you, Con, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. So water use in California is a complex issue, but however, we use majority of our water for irrigation of crops. So some of it goes to human use. That's about 44 million acre foot per year, but we are at a tipping point where it has reached a critical state due to extended drought periods, and there might be some overuse in some crops, not necessarily grapes. So it is a dynamic reality that we have to face. But for grape vines, we're using roughly about 300 gallons of water for irrigation to produce about a gallon of wine. So all in all, we made about 316 million gallons of wine. This ebbs and flows every year. So this is a number that's presented by the Wine Institute for public consumption. Of course, in more productive regions, we do use less water. As our productivity goes up, our water footprint goes down, as you will see. And the other problem we have, which we will talk in the next session, is the shift in the California's climate. We have little to no cloud cover. We have intermittent heat spikes, like Mark alluded to earlier. There is a general warming trend. There is no appreciable increase in precipitation supply. If you were to compare Bordeaux and Napa, these are different regions that gather, a premium in their per bottle price. Average sugar at harvest has consistently gone up, and this is more acute after year 1980. And some of our growing degree days in our coastal regions have consistently increased, and average sugar at harvest has increased as well. So this year is exceptionally dry. It is the driest February on our record. Compared to our previous water years, we're at a very critical point right now, and it doesn't look like we are going to catch up. Irrigation, on the other hand, optimizes and it's one of the most desirable tool to improve productivity and quality. It has an increasing trend to be able to control plant water stress, but even though that has some finite limit. So we set up these trials to look at how these might affect at different water supply levels, if these standard irrigation practices are economically sustainable in California, whether these affect plant physiology and berry composition of Cabernet grown in the hottest portion of Napa Valley, which is Region 3, Region 4. And we want to evaluate the impact of these practices on water resources and associated with wine grapes. We did this work at the Oakville station. It's a Bale Silt Loam series. This was a traditional Cabernet vineyard, spaced 6 feet by 8 feet, oriented northeast southwest on a 110 rootstock, traditional clone, clone 8. The irrigation treatments that we considered here were we replaced 25% of ET crop, 50% of ET crop, or we replaced the full crop demand at this location. So they were delivered with 2 liters an hour, essentially a half a gallon emitter, 1 gallon emitter, or 2 gallon emitters. So it covered the whole range that you can expect in a region warm such as this. The applications here started in April, and it went all the way to harvest. Crop coefficient at this location was calculated as the percent shade under the grapevine at midday, and we have a CIMA station on site that we gathered the reference ET data from. We measure everything when we make these studies to make a reliable recommendation. So we looked at plant water status, vegetative growth, and sugar metabolism, how this might affect productivity in the upcoming seasons. Of course, components of yield, berry composition, which included anthocyanins, flavonols, and then we looked at the environmental impact, water footprint of these treatments. And then I ask this all the time, why don't more people work in viticulture? Because you get to combine both field work and also very elaborate lab work, but we cannot find people to study viticulture anymore. So if anyone's wanting to do a master's or a PhD, get in touch with me. So when we look at the results, we ran this trial for 2 years. So it finished in 2020. It was in a hyper arid season. We were in deficit 31 inches compared to the previous water year. So it was very miserable conditions, and these conditions are now continuing on to 2021. So we're again in deficit, with the 31 inches of deficit coming in from the previous season as well. The crop coefficient, how these develop, x-axis growing degree days, crop coefficient is on the left-hand y-axis. As you can see in 2019, crop coefficient grows very nice and slow. It reaches up the max around like 0.55. In 2019, the hyper arid, drought season, it just shoots up and stays at like 0.5 the whole season. So essentially, since the soil profile was not full, we did not, explore the allocated space given to these grapevines properly at this location. Looking at the stem water potential in water year 2018, 2019, all treatments separate, like May showed earlier. The 100% ET crop replacement treatment was hardly under stress, but 25% ET and 50% ET, they were much more stressed than 100%, and there's not a whole lot of difference between them, between 25 and 50% ET. 2019, 2020 water year, we do not record any differences, although we're applying much more different applied water amounts. Because the soil profile is not full, the plant is not able to respond due to severe deficits in the soil water profile. Of course, this affects how much carbon the plant produces from the leaves to translocate into the shoots, roots, and to the berries. 100% ET crop treatment, it will make a lot of photosynthetates. It'll distribute it. 50 and 25%, they partition it differently all throughout the season. And we see a similar response in the second year in the hyper-arid region. They were both affected by irrigation treatments in both seasons. However, the response was not as strong in the hyper-arid and drought season. When I look at the vegetative growth, maybe this is why people don't want to work for me. I had people defoliate these vines, and then we dug them up with a backhoe and dried them up. When we compare the weight of leaves, shoots, trunks, and the roots, the grapevine partitions them differentially based on the amount of water that we apply. The trunk mass does not change in the grapevine because that grows radially. But if you compare the amount of root growth, we have quite a bit of difference. So we're at like 1.4 kilo with 100% ETC. Likewise, more growth in shoots and more growth in leaves. And these linearly decline as you reduce the amount of water that's applied to these plants. Likewise, these leaf carbohydrates, shoot carbohydrates, and root carbohydrates are differentially affected. What I want to show here is that a lot of the responses to irrigation that you see, these are the exchangeable currencies within the plant. In the leaves, it's modulated more chronically than say in the roots or the shoots. We see the most response in exchangeable currencies in the leaves. 50 and 25% ET crop replacement doesn't make as many exchangeable sugar currencies in the leaves as the 100% ET crop. And the storage compound starch as percentage of dry weight was also enhanced with the 100% ET crop after these grapevines are growing under these conditions in 2 seasons. When we look at how these non-structural carbohydrates are applied by water, one thing I want you to pay attention to is the D-raffinose here. This is what will affect the fruitfulness of the buds in the upcoming seasons. These are affected in the shoots of the grapevine, where the next season's growth will happen from latent auxiliary buds. You see them being modulated by 100% ET crop and a 50% ET crop. 25% ET crop water replacement will take your yields away in the upcoming season. Moving on, when I look at this, this is probably a very good visual take-home message. Yield, we do not get paid for quality. We do get paid by the tons that we produced. Here's a 25% ET crop, 50% ET crop, and 100% ET crop. So this probably doesn't need too much explanation, but I will show it to you anyways. All grapevines have the same number of clusters per vine. Statistically, they are the same. However, yield per vine is modulated. The source to sink ratio or crop load ratio of these vines are modulated. If you look at this very closely, yield per vine going from 22 pounds to 16 pounds between 100 to 50% ETC, 100 to 50% ETC, similar yields over the course of years, but certainly different by the amount of yields that we apply. Leaf area to fruit ratio also very significantly different. If you look at the printed material, we're looking for values between 0.8 to a 1.2 to a leaf area to fruit ratio. We're hitting these with a 100% ET crop replacement for a proper growth of these vines. When I look at berry mass, 100% ET crop increased berry mass in both seasons, as you can see here. However, it decreases total soluble solids, so we're able to dehydrate the vines with a 25% ETC. However, since there's no virus in these vines, we have no problem reaching 24 bricks in both years on the same day. When I look at anthocyanins, although there's a lot of modulation going on, when I look at the production or biosynthesis of anthocyanins, not concentration, none of these treatments do affect any of the anthocyanins in this case. Some modulation flavonols, which might affect mouthfeel in this case. And when I look at the water footprint, the total water footprint of agricultural systems includes the green water footprint, blue water footprint, and gray water footprint. Despite what's reported in popular media, gray water is not something that's discharged from let's say like sewage, etc. Gray water footprint in agricultural systems is the fresh water used to dilute pollution, mostly from nitrogenous herbicides. So green water is rainwater used, blue water is surface or groundwater, and gray water that's used to dilute herbicidal or fertilizer applications. In this case, the water footprint in these systems played like this in both years. Smallest application, 25% ETC, has the highest water footprint per ton of grapes harvested. So the more yield we have, the smaller our water footprint is, and I'm just going to leave this with you to explore it yourselves and digest it, take it to the bank, if you will.
5 minutes.
Okay. We also looked at mycorrhizal colonization in this case. Mycorrhizae are a beneficial fungi in the soil. They're increased under water stresses or arid seasons. They do increase as we apply less water. However, it's not enough to overcome the droughty situations that we have in these soils that we have. AMF abundance increase with 25% ETC, but it decreases with 100% ETC in our case. So the replacement of different fractions affects both primary and secondary metabolism as well as yield. We cannot, apply these, severe deficits as, some wineries might ask you to. They do have a detrimental effect on yield, but they might improve berry quality, especially with bricks. 50% ET crop replacement results in an improved berry quality without affecting yield components. 100% ET improves growth, yield, but diminishes berry quality through decreased TSS, total soluble solids, anthocyanins, and flavonols in this case. The take-home message from here, the irrigation strategies that include some sort of a deficit, it must reduce the amount of water applied to grapevines. It decreases the water footprint, but also maintains or increases grape quality at the cost of some reduction or potential yield. Our optimal irrigation application for Cabernet Sauvignon in hot or warm regions, the sweet spot is somewhere between 50 to 60% of ET crop, like May alluded to earlier. But there's more information on this. If you want a good nighttime or a bathroom reading, we published this paper as an open source. You have the presentations, I assume. You can look at it in greater detail. But what I want to show you, our KC here was 0.5. So when I plot date versus ETO and date versus actual ETA measured by surface renewal and compare them, the date versus Casey Williams measurement, there's about a 50% discrepancy in how Casey is calculated using vegetative indices. As Daniela Zachariah pointed out, this is probably not the best way to assess Casey in these droughty situations, because we're underestimating by quite a bit on how much we should apply. So if we can like measure Casey properly in these cases, in these droughty years, we use the surface renewal in this case, we are able to make our water applications more and more precise as these drought situations take hold. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge these funding agencies, and of course Nazareth Torres, who took over this study by the reins and ran it very well with the help of Cliff Hugh, the other postdoc in our lab. And then, of course, Syngenta Crop Protection, Allied Grape Growers, who have been great supporters of UC Davis. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Con. I really appreciated the humor that you added to that presentation and how clear you made everything. That was great. So next up, we've got Dr. May Columber returning, and she's going to talk about salinity and leaching. So let's get our notepads ready so we can learn from Dr. Columber. And also remember to ask some questions in the questions box, because we'll do a Q&A session around 11:20 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Looks great, May.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so switching gears now to the topic of salinity. And so my understanding of the Lodi growing area is that you're very fortunate in that you don't commonly have a lot of salinity problems, but salts in our arid climate can build up in any irrigated system. And so we're going to go over some of the basics of what salinity is, what some of the appropriate amendments may be to treat that, and then an example of how you would do a leaching calculation. Okay, so as I mentioned, in California and drip irrigated systems, even small levels of salts will build up over time. So even in the Lodi area where water quality tends to be good and the soils are normal, and I say normal meaning not saline, salt can still accumulate. And so because our micro irrigation systems have really high efficiency, we're making more targeted application of water in those top layers of the soil. And so as plants transpire and moisture evaporates from the surface, the water is released, but any salts that are in the water remain behind in that soil water. And so as a result, over time, the concentration of salts can gradually increase in that top layer of soil. And we'll also see that this will happen in regulated deficit irrigation systems, as well as just regular irrigated, micro irrigated systems. And also in our arid system, we tend to have low rainfall to accomplish leaching in the off season. So there's potential for salts to accumulate in your area. So what is salinity? Salinity is most simply defined as the concentration of dissolved salts in irrigation water or in the soil water. And so salts are bonded together by opposing charges. So sodium chloride and calcium sulfate, which is also known as gypsum, are two examples here. And so they consist of a positively charged and negative, a positively charged cation and a negatively charged anion. However, in irrigation water and in soil water, many of these bonds can be broken easily, and the water will consist of soluble ions of individual cations. Some examples would be calcium, magnesium, sodium, or potassium, and then anions, sulfates, chlorides, bicarbonate, carbonates, and nitrate. Boron is another example of a nutrient. It doesn't tend to have a charge, but boron is also boron is essential for plant nutrition, but in very small amounts. And so when we talk about salinity, we need to be concerned about excessive levels of boron. And boron tends to be associated with soils at high pH levels or saline soils. And ample acidic amendments and water are needed to flush excess boron out of the root zone if it's accumulated to toxic levels in your root zone. So we need to monitor our soil and our water sources for excesses or deficiencies of these different types of nutrients. Okay, so one of the main parameters that we use to measure salinity is electrical conductivity in the soil and water. And so, as I mentioned, electrical conductivity is driven by the concentrations of salts. And some of those ions that I mentioned are going to conduct more electricity than others. Some of the units that you'll see on a soil or water report are usually reported in decisiemens per meter or millimoles per centimeter. But those two are equivalent. So when you see one or the other, you can use those interchangeably. A lot of growers may be familiar with total dissolved solids as a way to assess, does the water that I'm using have any potential for clogging? And so we can actually convert electrical conductivity to TDS and vice versa. And so TDS represents the milligrams of salt remaining if we were to evaporate 1 liter of water to dryness. And the units that's usually expressed in are milligrams per liter or parts per million. And here's an example of how you would do a conversion based on the conductivity of your water. And so generally speaking, you all probably have water source with an EC from between 0.1 and 5 decisiemens per meter. And so you would use this top equation here to make that conversion. So in terms of managing salinity, we're most commonly going to refer to measures of electrical conductivity. Okay, so to make an assessment of the risk of salinity or even toxic levels of salts in our water and soil, we need to look at a number of different parameters, and these are useful to assess. Is the level of salts going to cause osmotic stress to the plant roots? Is it going to reduce the ability of vines to take up water? Is there potential levels is there potentially toxic levels of ions? Is the pH very high? When we see increases in pH above about 7.58, we tend to see reductions in nutrient availability. We can also look at the relationship of sodium to electrical conductivity to see if there's potential for infiltration issues. We also need to look at things like bicarbonates, the bicarbonate levels, and pH levels to make the correct amendment choices. And then finally, again, we need to look at that relationship of SAR, which is the sodium absorption ratio. So that's sodium absorption ratio is the proportion of sodium ions relative to other important ions, calcium and magnesium, in relationship to the overall EC. And so I'm going to go into more depth speaking about that. But so we need to look at pH of bicarbonates to select amendments if they're needed, and then as far as determining the rate of those amendments, we need to be thinking about the proportion of SAR to EC. Okay, and then also that relationship of SAR to EC is going to clue us in on if we may have some potential problems at the surface of the soil. And so we can look at those relationships both in our irrigation water and in a soil water analysis. Another thing is that you may notice if you're just out in the field, you can visually see some of the characteristics of a response to a high sodium level relative to a low EC. And so an example here would be two pictures of the soil, a surface of the soil, and the one on the left shows a situation where the soil structure has been what we call dispersed. And so generally this happens when you have that high level of sodium in proportion to those other ions. And so sodium has a tendency, it has a what we call large sphere of hydration. It has a tendency to cause a swelling between the platelets of the soil particles. Okay, and when we add water with a low EC, it causes it causes the soil particles to disperse. And then when that dispersal happens, all those little particles kind of clump together and seal off the surface of the soil. What we want though is flocculated soil. Flocculated soil allows for water to percolate and infiltrate down through the soil. And so calcium, when we have calcium dominating the exchange complexes of soil particles, it tends to hold together. It has a double charge, and so it tends to bond more strongly to these soil particles and resulting in this flocculated characteristic. And so this explains some of the mechanics why we use calcium sulfate gypsum to displace sodium and flush it from the soil profile. Additionally, I mentioned specific ion toxicity. In grapes, the critical values are not very well defined due to the fact that there's a lot of variability in response among different cultivars and different growing conditions and climates. But general rule of thumb would be if you see greater than 0.5% of sodium in your leaf analysis, 1 to 1.5% of chloride, and then greater than 80 parts per million of boron tends to be getting a little bit high. And then this diagram just shows it different times of the year where you would collect a leaf sample, depending on if you're in the bloom stage or the veraison stage. Okay, so I'm going to show this graph a couple times, but I like to discuss when we're thinking about salinity management, thinking about a timeline. And we generally tend to recommend managing if you have a salinity problem in the dormant season. And the reason for that is that when the vines are no longer transpiring, you have a less evaporative, transpirative forces pulling water through the soil. And what our objective is with salinity management and leaching is to move salts down. And so we have less upward moving forces with water in that dormant period. So generally, I recommend sampling after the harvest season is over, maybe November, and usually if you know you have a salinity problem that extends beyond that soil surface, we recommend sampling your soil from 1 to 5 feet. And we're going to pay particular attention to the EC, the pH, the SAR levels, and boron. And then we're going to calculate, based on that information, we're going to calculate and apply our soil and water amendments if they're needed. And then after applying amendments, we're going to determine the depth of water. So in this case, the inches per foot of depth of soil that we need to achieve the desired salinity that we want to attain. And then we're going to determine, based on how much water we need to apply, what the timeline is for completing that program. And so I'll go through that in more detail later. Okay, so our amendment, just at a very basic level, when you're thinking about amendments, you either have the option of using calcium-based amendments or acid-forming amendments. And the main way of making a distinction of which of those you're going to need or combination of is going to depend on the level of carbonates in your water and the free lime in your soil. If we have bicarbonates on your analysis that show a level of greater than 2.5 milliequivalents per liter, then acid forming amendments are going to be your primary source of material to achieve reclamation. If in terms of lime in your soil, if you have less than 1% lime content, then calcium amendments are going to be a good bet to do that reclamation, as I mentioned, displacing the sodium with calcium. If levels are greater than 1%, that means you've got a free source of calcium in the soil. That needs acid to solubilize it and make it available for your leaching purposes. Okay, so when we think of that, I mentioned a couple times now that we need to look at the relationship between the sodium absorption ratio and electrical conductivity. And so generally speaking, if your SAR is less than 5 times greater than the EC, then you generally probably aren't going to have a hazard for infiltration problems. As we get above 5, then we start to see problems. And so this graph also illustrates that relationship. So here we have a sodium absorption ratio, and hopefully this would be a very extreme case for conditions in your area. But if we have a sodium absorption ratio of 17.5, in relation to a 1 decisiemens of water, that's greater than 15 times greater the sodium absorption ratio to the EC. And so the way that we need to address that is
5 minutes.
Say, okay, we need to. Is that the 5-minute warning?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought I heard you say. Okay, so we need to increase the amount of calcium on the cation exchange complexes of the soil particles. We need to increase the levels of that in relation to sodium. So we're going to add calcium to the system to displace the sodium so that we can flush the sodium from the root zone. And so EC is basically the combination of sodium, calcium, and magnesium divided by a factor of 10. And so here we can see that among these nutrients, calcium only contributes 0.5 milliequivalents to a total of 10.2 milliequivalents. If we increase the amount of calcium by 3, now we're going to the concentration of calcium and magnesium combined is going to go from a factor of 0.6 to 3.6. And then if we can accomplish that, we're going to temporarily increase the level of EC in the water. improve, and then that's going to decrease the SAR. So now we have an SAR of 7.2 to 1.3, so very much improved compared to that severe reduction we were seeing initially. Okay, so when choosing if we need to do a water or soil application, I'm going to assume in your area most problems are probably going to be confined to the surface. We can reclaim with frequent but small amounts of drip or micro emitter applied amendments. If we have problems that we're seeing throughout the root zone, we may need to use a combination of those water applied amendments with banded or injected amendments as well. And so here's a table just describing some of those different type of amendments. Okay, as I mentioned, calcium. Calcium is going to be one of those calcium providing amendments, means that you have low levels of bicarbonates, low level of soil lime. You would select that. If that's not the case, you would tend towards acid forming amendments. But the main objective that I'm trying to get across is that we need to increase the levels of calcium to raise the EC and lower that SAR in the water. Okay, and so here's a quick example for calculating a depth of reclamation. So as Mark Batney mentioned earlier, if your average salinity is getting greater than 2.5 decisiemens per meter, that's higher than what we would like to see for vines. And so here in an example, say we have some soil analyses for the top 3 feet of soil in 1 foot depth increments. We know the average is about 2 decisiemens per meter. We'd like to decrease that to say 1.5. And so this calculation here is going to give us the depth of water for depth of soil. It's going to use a coefficient factor. And then we're going to say, okay, we would like to achieve a desired EC of 1.5 over our original EC of 2.5. And this calculation assumes that you have leaching water that is around 1 decisiemen per meter. So as I mentioned here, we're targeting 1.5 and we have 2.5. And then the actual depth of leaching water, I think I may have made a mistake in the calculation here. But anyway, the actual depth of leaching water to 3 feet would be 0.75 feet. In order to determine what that means in terms of how much water you need to apply. So we need to know what the depth of water is this should say vines per acre times how many gallons per inch or in a square foot. So as I mentioned, we've got 0.75 feet. There's 12 inches per foot. So we know we need to apply 9 inches of water to achieve our reclamation goals. In terms of our irrigation system, if we know the vines per acre and we know the output per vine, say we have 1,089 vines per acre and the output per vine is about a half a gallon per hour. We know our output is 0.022 acre inches per hour. And so my rough calculation there is that in order to reduce the EC from 2.5 decimeters to 1.5, we would need about 409 hours or 17 days. And so having this projection lets us know if we're doing the sampling and analysis in November, how to plan for the winter in conjunction with precipitation events. Just in terms of leaching, it's important to consider what type of texture your soil has. It's going to be a much quicker to reduce the fraction of the original salt content with, say, a sandy loam texture that infiltrates and percolates water much more quickly than, say, a clay loam soil. So you may need to adjust that estimate up or down depending on your soil texture. So back to that timeline I mentioned, we're going to sample early on, do the analysis, make a determination if we need soil or water amendments. calculate that depth of reclamation. And then when leaching in the dormant season, first we want to bring the profile to field capacity. And so generally speaking, with the sandy loam soil, maybe that would be over a 3-foot depth or so, would be about 3 to 6 inches over 3 to 4 days. And then you would allow for 2 to 4 days for drainage, and then you would begin your leaching applications. And so after you've applied the desired amount of water, we're going to resample late in that dormant period before leaf out, and sample again for that effective rooting depth to determine how effective that applied leaching reclamation was in reducing your EC, and so that you know what your starting point is for the growing season. So in summary, salinity is the dissolved salts in irrigation water or soil solution. Salt problems can develop in micro-irrigated or deficit irrigated vines in semi-arid climates of California. Salinity creates osmotic stress, which can reduce growth and vigor of your vines, and ion toxicity, which can actually cause leaves to senesce and fall from the tree and reduce your photosynthetic potential, reduce the ability of the plants for producing your crop. It can induce nutrient deficiencies and cause infiltration problems. Soil and water analyses are necessary to choose the correct type and rate of amendments and your leaching fraction. And amendments are applied. The goal of amendments are to replace sodium with calcium to improve soil structure and infiltration. And leaching is best accomplished in the dormant season when evapotranspiration rates are very low. And that concludes my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collenberg. Really appreciate that. And to send any of your salinity and leaching questions her way, and we'll get those answered during the question and answer session. Next up, we have Dr. Khaled Bali. He's the Irrigation Water Management Specialist, and he's at the UC Kearney Ag Center. He's going to be talking to us this morning about water budgeting. So thank you, Dr. Bali.
This morning. So basically things to consider when it comes to water budgeting, the soil type. We talked a lot about the soil type, basically looking at the soil texture and its impact on irrigation management. So basically we'll be talking about impact of infiltration rate and irrigation frequency and how they're related to soil type. Irrigation system. We're dealing here mostly with the drip irrigation system. So we'll be talking about efficiency, the application rate, and the flow rate, and how we can connect this information together to make irrigation decisions. We also, you also learned about crop water requirements, ET, the crop coefficient, and different methods to estimate the crop water requirements, whether based on plant technologies or based on soil moisture. And then we'll talk a little bit about fine-tuning the water budget based on special considerations. For example, rainfall this year, we didn't have much rainfall, so it's going to have an impact on making irrigation decisions. We already learned from the last workshop about the soil texture. Soil texture will make a big difference when it comes to making irrigation decisions. You need to check about soil variability. Do you have a uniform soil type within the same field, or you may have 2 different or 3 different soil types? So the application rate and the irrigation frequency will depend on that. Basically, it's related to water holding capacity and infiltration rate. We also need to consider root zone depth in making irrigation decisions. Are we talking about the top 2 or 3 feet of the soil profile, or we want to go deeper and look at reserve, especially if we have higher evapotranspiration demand. We already talked a lot about, salinity and leaching. We want to consider the soil type in making decisions on leaching. Can we leach with the flood irrigation system or a sprinkler system? What's the best system to leach? To make it simple, when you look at the soil moisture triangle, basically you'll be looking at 3 different classifications of soil. Soils with high water holding capacities, most likely, anywhere in this area where you'll find that you have most likely clay in the name of the soil texture. Those are high water holding capacity, but they have lower infiltration rate. So when we're making irrigation decisions, if we go with long run times, we may end up with runoff, especially if we're dealing with the slopey, with the fields on slopes. Sometimes the best soil is something in between the clay soils and the sandy soil, and this has medium water holding capacity and medium infiltration rate. Now, when we're dealing with sandy soils, light soils, we're typically looking at low water holding capacity and higher infiltration rate. So in these type of soils, we don't want to do long irrigations because most likely we're going to end up having that water leaving the root zone. So we may want to do more frequent irrigation events for shorter period of time. So when it comes to soil resources, there are plenty of information on the web. The California Soil Resources Lab, the Soil Survey web. We have lots of publications through the UCANR Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Lots of information also from NRCs and RCDs all over California. Irrigation system is important. Now we're dealing mostly with a drip irrigation system. If you have a different irrigation system, that would be a completely different talk. But basically, we want to look at the existing irrigation system. Check what's the application rate. How many inches, if we run the system for 1 hour, how many inches are we getting? Make sure that we have a flow meter. If we're missing a flow meter, that's an essential component that we have to have. Make sure that we're running the system correctly. We can spot issues with the system with a flow meter. You want to make sure that you check the system efficiency, which is basically distribution uniformity. It would be a good idea to do the DU testing at the beginning of the season. Once you determine the distribution uniformity, you're going to get a number. That number should give you an idea if you have issues or not. For example, if you have distribution uniformity of 85 to 90% or more, it means that your system is working correctly. If you have numbers lower than 85%, then you want to see what's causing these lower efficiency. You may want to look at the filtration system, meters, fixing leaks, or other issues with the irrigation system. And the distribution uniformity is basically our efficiency, and it will make a big impact on the application rate. So the application rate is basically the crop water requirements that you get from CMS or from Thule or from any other method divided by your system efficiency. You want to also consider the water and energy cost. If your efficiency is low, you're going to end up applying more irrigation water, which is going to cost you more money and it's going to cost more energy. It's a good idea to have flow meter. You can use the flow meter as a quick and easy way to check about, your application rate. What's your current application rate, and how does it compare to the design application rate that you got when you got the system, whether it was 5 years ago or 3 years ago? If you have lots of variation between the existing application rate and the design application rate, there's something going wrong and you need to find a way to fix it. Now, if you're looking at the new irrigation system, and we have lots of incentives program to improve irrigation efficiency that I'll talk about it later on, consider the energy rates. You know, with all the irrigation systems, the system design is basically on standard 24 hours, and then they take anywhere from 4 to 6 hours for maintenance. So the runtime could be as high as 18 to 20 hours. Now, with the new system design, you want to consider the energy cost, because if the energy cost is high between 4 and 9 p.m., we're no longer looking at 18 to 20 hours of design for the new system. That number of hours will be reduced, and we're going to have a completely different design to make sure that we can utilize the lower energy cost. When it comes to irrigation system resources, there are plenty of resources available, mostly from the irrigation vendors, and there are so many manufacturers. And I didn't want to specify companies here, but there are plenty on the market. We have lots of publications through ANR. For the last 6 to 7 years, we had the opportunity to get money from CDFA to improve irrigation and energy efficiency on irrigated farms in California. And I think in the next few months, we're going to have another opportunity to look at the State Water Efficiency and Enhancement Program, the SWEEP, and that will provide incentives for growers to improve irrigation, save water, and reduce energy. There's the Healthy Soil Program also. That's another opportunity to look at the soil health and make decisions that will help you when it comes to water conservation. Sometimes the California Energy Commission will provide funding to do energy improvements. Also look at the local utilities, which sometimes they have incentive programs to help you with improving the efficiency of the irrigation system. When it comes to crop water requirements, the easiest source to get information about reference evapotranspiration is CIMIS, the California Irrigation Management Information System. And that's where you're going to get the reference evapotranspiration. Fortunately, right now we have, you don't have to go to a specific CIMIS station. You can just click on the location of your field, and that will give you a specially accurate ETO number. Daniele and Khan talked a lot about the crop coefficient. There are various sources to obtain the crop coefficients, and we're still in the process of getting more accurate crop coefficients based on the new irrigation systems that we have. The actual ETA, where you don't have to worry about crop coefficient ETO and just get the lump sum number for the actual water use. There are a few companies in the market, Thule Technologies and Arable Mark and other sources. Soil moisture sensors, there are plenty of vendors on the market, and you can find something that you could use to help you making decisions related to irrigations. We also have here 2 websites from the UC Davis and UC ANR about nut crops and vines. Keep in mind, it's really a good idea to have a soil moisture system in your farm. And as Mark Batney mentioned earlier, you don't want to have stress early on during the vegetative growth. So when you take a look at the soil moisture reading, it depends on what kind of stage that you're dealing with. Early on, you don't want to have stress. Later on, the regulated stress will help you getting the maximum quality. And you want to have these soil moisture at different levels, different depths. We're typically looking during the irrigation season, we're typically looking at the top 2 to 3 feet, but looking also beyond the top 3 feet, going to 4 feet and 5 feet will give you an idea whether you have reserves, if we have a heat wave or not, if you're doing excessive leaching. If you have a soil moisture sensor at 5 feet and the reading is always wet, it means you may be over irrigating. There are plenty of technology available that will help you, making decisions whether you have stress or not. This is a picture of an almond field in the Hanford area. And just to give you an idea, we have the same soil texture based on the soil map. So this is a good indication where, yeah, the soil map will give you an idea about, what kind of texture that you have. In this field, we have uniform soil texture. But actually, if you walk the field, do a backhoe and get soil samples and, go feet to the surface, you're going to see lots of variability. You may have compaction, even though the soil type is the same. You may have compaction in some areas. You may have good drainage in other areas. So this is one of the examples of the commercial entities that can provide you with an idea about stress. So you can see here the green and blue colors indicate no stress. Here early on during the irrigation season, we have lots of stress on the west side of the field, and you could see we corrected this one with applying the correct amount of water. Actually, we're using here variable rate irrigation to eliminate stress. When it comes to making irrigation decisions, Mecca Lumber has this weekly ET report that will give you really a good idea about, the crop water use over the last week, and you can make a quick decision based on that. So I'm going to take an example of wine grape here. This is from 2019. Wine grape crop water use over the last week, for example, would be like 0.67 inches. And here also it shows that we had rainfall. So if we had rainfall of about 1.2 inches last week and our ET was about 0.7, means, well, we had enough rainfall to meet the ET demand. But this is not always the case. We're assuming that we have 100% effective rainfall. Now, if we have slope, that rainfall may ended up in runoff in certain zones, so we may have to apply. Then from there, you look at the irrigation efficiency. In this case, like if I have an irrigation efficiency of 85%, I can take this 0.67 divided by 0.85, and I need to apply 0.8 inches. There's another way to look at it in a simplified way, is to look how many gallons I need to apply per vine. So in this case, 35 gallons per vine based on 622 vines per acre. Now I can take this information and make a quick irrigation decision. So as I mentioned earlier from the previous slide, the ETC 0.67 inches per week, I divide that ETC by my irrigation efficiency. You can see if my irrigation efficiency is low, the irrigation requirements will be high. This is why we need to have good irrigation efficiency. I look at the precipitation over the last week. If I have flat ground and most of that water went into the ground, then there is no need for irrigation because I had enough rainfall to meet my ET demand or what I lost over last week. But also, we have to check the soil moisture and make sure that we have enough moisture in the ground. So if precipitation is zero, most likely, if it is not zero, we need to apply the 0.8 inches. And then I need to know what's my application rate for the irrigation system. So assuming that I have 0.05 inches per hour application rate, I can do the calculation and say, okay, I need to run the system 16 hours this week to replace the ET that I lost over the last week. Another easy way to do the calculation is, you don't have to worry about too many numbers. Just look at what's the ET, how much you need to replace, how many gallons you need for each vine. So in this example from the table that May provided is 35 gallons per vine. I can, just take this number, multiply it by the number of vines I have per acre and my acreage. In this example, like let's say 20 acres. And I know I need to apply 435,000 gallons. I can look at my flow meter and like let's say if my flow meter showing, flow rate of about 450, I can take the crop water requirements in gallon divided by my flow rate, and that will give me how many minutes I need to run the system this week. And if I do the calculation, I will end up with just about the same number, 16 hours. Now, this number is really important because when you design a system and you should have 450 gallons, if you're running the irrigation system and all of a sudden you see that this number went to 500 or 550, means that you have a leak somewhere and your application rate is higher. If that number is much less than the design, like let's say 10% less than the design flow rate, it means I have clogged emitter and I need to make sure that I can clean those emitters. Other considerations, this year is a perfect example where we have relatively dry year. You need to check your soil profile and you may have to irrigate sooner than last year or 2 years ago. So good idea to check the soil profile to make an irrigation decision on when you're going to irrigate for this season. And with this, I think we're done with my presentation, and hopefully we have enough time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bali. We sure do have plenty of time for questions. So John Shin is going to come on now, and he'll lead us in the question and answer session. I know he's got some questions that he's thought of during the presentation. Thank you, John. Again, John's a Lodi grower and a Lodi Rural Certified Sustainable Grower, and he has graciously helped put all of these workshops together with our UC experts.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everybody for those presentations. Those were, again, a lot of amazing information. A couple of questions, and again, if you guys have any questions out there, if you've been watching, even if it's just some clarifications, you said, hey, that was really interesting, but I kind of got, swept over by all the information, and you need some clarification on some stuff. Feel free to throw them into the chat box. We've got that open. So we did have a question come up about Dr. Kurderal's paper that he mentioned, and the link for that paper has been posted in the chat section. If you're interested in looking more at that, please, you can copy and paste that link and look at that some more. A couple of questions that I had as I was going through some of this. And a lot of my questions probably are going to be more maybe practical, I guess, in nature. One of the ones for Dr. Kulumbar, you talked about the sensitivity of the tendril dieback. That does happen naturally at a certain point in the growing process, but at what point would you say is kind of average to see that, or at what point would you see that dieback in the growing process and say, this is bad, I need to look at my irrigation program?
Oh, I think, am I muted, or am I muted? Okay. So I think if we were looking at it in terms of plant water status, that for the tendrils was, I want to say that was like about 11 or 12 bars in that range. So, I mean, you probably would be looking at this cumulatively over several measurements, to see how the vines are responding to the irrigation. So if you're, if you do these measurements post irrigation and you're repeatedly seeing levels that are more negative than say 10, then I would assume that could could potentially be bad for tendril growth. But I defer to everybody else because they know far more about vine management than myself. So.
Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. In District 11, when we did a similar work to the one I showed you in Lodi, the work we did was on by Jahant Road with a Cabernet on 1103P rootstock. Like May said, tendril growth slows down. If you're looking at leaf water potential, which is easier. You're going to start seeing it slow down, -11 to -12 bars, midday leaf water potential. But at -14 bars, you'll start seeing them die back and shoot growth slow down. But compared to other fruit crops, grapevines have an indeterminate growth habit, meaning that they will continue to grow until frost stops it, because it's an understory plant that developed in a temperate forest. But -12 to -14 for tendrils for Cabernet, if you're going to use it as a model plant, would be what I would say.
Yeah, John, as far as the timing of that, I mean, the time to be concerned about seeing tendrils drying up and falling off would be in that period from bud break through the bloom and the fruit set. And that's when we want to make sure we don't have that water stress imposed on the vine.
Okay, that's good. I know a lot of farmers out there. We don't have access to pressure bombs. We use tendrils as kind of that first sign. So that's good to know that if anybody's seeing that dieback in that period, then there's some issues we may need to address. Also, in the salinity build-up, I know prior to our flooding.
Sorry, I have to quickly interrupt you, John. So if you're a presenter, if you can mute yourself when you're not talking, if I mute you, then you can't unmute yourself. So if everyone will mute themselves if you're not talking, and then unmute when you talk. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Stephanie. I know in that last drought season that we had, just kind of anecdotally speaking, a lot of farmers were talking about seeing a lot of salinity buildup and issues with salt in their soil. And then we had the big rain and kind of flushed everything out. Now that we're looking at going back into possibly another drought cycle, if we don't historically have maybe issues with salinity in our soil, but we have the potential for buildup again, how often would you recommend that we be sampling out there? Is it a yearly thing that we need to be doing, or is there kind of a rule of thumb for how many years irrigation seasons, I guess, we go through before we have to really start looking at sampling for salinity buildup?
Well, I would say that you probably need to do it less than areas that have a history of buildup that goes deep into the soil profile. I mean, I assume that if it's just sort of a response to drought stress, that it's going to be pretty shallow in the soil surface where the salt is going to be accumulating. I guess the best indicator might be if you start to notice problems visually with vines. Are you seeing evidence of necrosis, senescence? Are you seeing drainage problems on the vineyard floor? Then you're going to need to address things more frequently, do more frequent sampling to get a handle on what the source of the problem is, and making those decisions about how to best manage it.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just follow up and just say, the sites that have the poor quality irrigation water are the sites that really have to be pay more attention to that. We'll have a more frequent analysis. A lot of it's just driven by the irrigation water quality.
I would say also that I add that sometime, during drought period, people switch from surface water to groundwater, and there's a concentration of water diversion from the groundwater, and that might also cause a rapid buildup. Now, sometimes people also mix water, so it really depends. When you have groundwater that is not a very good quality, you tend to ruin also the surface water if you mix. And so I would recommend that people get a sense of what they have in terms of source of water. But I would say during the last drought, it was basically 2.5 years, we saw quite an increase in the salinity buildup in specific type of soil as a result of reduced application, but mostly was groundwater application and not so much surface water. So it really, I would say it really depends on where you are. It really depends on what source of water you have. But I think salinity is one of the things that really requires a lot of attention. And I would say within the season, if you're using groundwater, you may see a change in the salinity buildup in the soil. So within the course of the season. And so it really depends on the source of water.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Very good. So I guess kind of something off of that is really important that if you want to improve the leaching, don't keep dumping bad water on top of it. So you may just be adding to the problem. Good. Okay.
You'll only be able to reduce the salinity, as good as what the level of your irrigation water is. So.
Have you, just kind of a side question as we talked about that, have you been seeing increased concentrations of those salts in the groundwater as the groundwater levels have been depleted?
I would say yes, in various zones of California, the San Joaquin Valley and the lower part of the Central Valley. Over the coast is probably, Mark, you probably have experienced a lot more of this problem. But along the Central Valley, I think there are increasing problems, and it's not only related to the drought, it's also related to the fact that the Central Valley water districts normally have been designed, the system has been designed for kind of a rotational water delivery once every 7 days or 10 days. Now micro irrigation requires water every 2 or 3 days or 1 day. And so there's a misconnection between that delivery demand and delivery supply. So even if you have surface water, you don't have a storage reservoir on the farm, you tend to use more groundwater. And so the decline in the groundwater level and the increase in quality problem has been going on even in good years. And so this is a little bit more articulated situation that we're experiencing because of the major shift towards micro irrigation systems in the Central Valley.
Okay, very good. All right, so I guess a kind of a good recommendation then to growers, if you haven't tested your water lately, or if you tested it 5 or 10 years ago, probably get it retested pretty soon because it could have changed in the last several years. So good rule.
John, just one additional comment. Probably the time of testing is also important because you might want to have a testing on the critical period when there's more concentration of water use, and that's the time when the quality of water is important. So I would say June to July. It's end of June and July. So it's a good timing for testing the water in the critical situation, so you get a sense of what you're facing.
Oh, good. That's an excellent point. Thank you very much. So doing it at the beginning of the season may not be as effective or give you the kind of information you're looking for as mid-season.
Yeah, it might be misleading. Is that you're good to go, and then you have salinity problem because you overlook the most critical water quality situation in the central part of the season where the water application is probably higher because of higher ET.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add, John, is that we developed this test. It's a biomarker for a season-long water stress. It's measured on the juice at a harvest, it gives you the carbon isotope composition of the grape. So that we can relate to the whole season water status of these sites. So this can, help people make decisions if they need to, do the groundwater management in the dormant season, etc. So, I mean, for groundwater recharge, so this C13 levels in California is, very easy to measure, and it's, stable over the course of the life of these vineyards. It's only going to be, manipulated by the amount of green water that you receive in the dormant season. So we can make these decisions to apply the groundwater recharge based on C13. So I can probably send the link to that paper as well. So it's a very powerful tool. It's just $7 per analyses at UC Davis Stable Isotope Lab. So we're recommending our growers, the ones that I'm in constant contact with, like allied grape growers, etc., to use these tools at their disposal to make more conscientious decisions, because we have the knowledge. We just have to get the word out to people through events such as this.
That's excellent. Okay, that's some good new information. Yeah, if you want to post that in either the chat box or get it to Stephanie.
I'll let me get it in the chat box now.
Okay, very good.
That sounds like a great LodiGrowers.com blog post.
Yeah, and this ties in very well with the information that Khaled gave, because Professor Zachariah, myself, and Isaiah Kiseka just published this open source paper on how to use this in large landscapes by sensing the soil electrical conductivity and link it to plant water status in many regions in California. So it's a very useful information, because if you have a Veris map right now, you can use this information. So let me get this out.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, another question, Dr. Batney, back on your first part, you talked about the year-over-year effect. How do you think the year-over-year effect coming off of essentially in our area 3 sub-average precipitation seasons, going down from 12 to 13 inches to 9 inches to 6 inches, will impact our vines? I know, again, anecdotally, a lot of growers mentioned last year's vine vigor was down dramatically. Farmers who normally might vine trim 2 to 3 times in a field, only vine trimmed 1 time. Their pruning weights are, I've heard, anywhere between 60-70% of normal. Shoot growth and overall cane length last year again was down. Obviously crop size was down quite a bit last year. How do you feel that might affect this year's, I know crystal ball kind of thing, and maybe there is no good answer, but how do you think that might affect this year? And what are some ways we might want to look at mitigating some of those?
No, it's a great question, and I think that we can project with our crystal ball can actually be fairly accurate that we're going to see more of that effect when you have these back-to-back dry years. Now, if this is our 3rd year in a row of drier than average rainfall, so the same effects that were observed last season, you can expect more of that for sites where people are not compensating with additional irrigation. So the grower who's going to be most affected by this is one who has sort of a irrigation program which does not change year to year. Let's say they always say, I'm going to start irrigating on, I don't know, June 10th every year or something like that. That's the grower who's going to suffer more because they're not adapting to the changing rainfall conditions. So this is where I would say you have to start looking at those vines early and the soil water content early, and if these dry conditions persist, to make sure that you have enough irrigation on those vines to not result in any type of slowing down of that early growth. So yeah, we will have to irrigate more to make up for the lack of rainfall. That's the key take home.
Okay. Excellent. And again, also remember that as we pump more water out of that ground to play catch up, that could then affect the quality of the groundwater that you're pumping up. So does that sound realistic? So again, kind of that circular thing where we talk about the more we pump, the more that affects our potentially affects our salts and things like that. So okay, I've asked a lot of my own questions. Are there any questions out there? I don't want to take all the time on this. Stephanie, have we had anybody write in the chat box? Any questions out there?
Yeah, I don't think we've answered Dwight's question. So let me I sent it to you earlier. I'm going to send it to you again right now, John.
Sorry, I must have missed that.
That's okay. Is there a way to convert ETC to centibars of vacuum?
Oh, there it is. So again, the question is there a way to convert ETC to centibars of vacuum? And that's a good question. Dr. Bali, you're on mute.
All right. So this is a great question. Unfortunately, this is soil specific, and you cannot convert it right away. But if you are working in one field and you can take readings and you do an irrigation, like let's say you start with 50 centibar and you apply 1 inch of irrigation water, you can see how much that level will go up. So you may end up, 2-3 days down to 25 centibar. That will be specific to your field and to your soil type. But there is no way you can find a general table that will convert centibars to ETC.
Okay. All right. Time for a couple more questions here. We're kind of running up to about 11:45. So if anybody's got any more questions, please get them either into the chat bar or we'll try to get those answered as best we can. Again, if you're going back through either your notes or something hits you later on, feel free to email Stephanie at the Winegrape Commission, and she will get those out, and we'll try to get those addressed and get some answers out there. I know one of the questions I also had was Dr. Kurderall. Great presentation. It talked about the 50 to 60% deficit irrigation in Cab Sauv. Is there any other information out there for other varietals? We've got a lot of whites and some other red varietals that might not be quite as effective in that 50 to 60% deficit irrigation. Nope. I think you're on mute. Nope. Still on mute.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Yeah, it's a great question. So when you look at grapevine varieties, especially with reds, not all of them will respond to deficits. So if you're looking at a cultivar like a Sangiovese, like deficits will certainly not help with quality or like a color composition, for example, because they have a different pattern of making color. But for Bordelais cultivars like a Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, that's a 50 to 60% ET crop replacement will work well. With whites, in our experience in the San Joaquin Valley, we recommended 75 to 80% of ET crop replacement, and that was both from maintaining of consistent yields and wood production year after year, because these are usually box pruned, and they're sold for volume. So in the Delta, where we did the work with muscats on a 1103P rootstock at 80% of ET crop replacement, we were consistently getting 38 tons to the acre on a 7 by 11 spacing. Well, of course, that was a November harvest, but when we looked at this work with Pinot Gris as well at LV Island, a little bit up the road from you guys, there we were again at like a 70% of ET crop replacement with a Pinot Gris on a 1103P rootstock. So 70% for whites, 75 to 80% seems to be doing quite well under mechanical constraints.
Okay, excellent. Good to know. Good to know. Very good. Got 2 more minutes, so I'll ask one last question. It's maybe more of something to work with the commission on later, but one of the things that seems to be a very important component for figuring out our crop need is the KC value. And it does seem like, I know you guys talked about you're going through a lot of work right now with this grant to get updated KC values. Is there any way we can help you guys get those values for this area? Because it seems like that's the big component to getting an effective ETC with our ETO values. So.
John, I think that's a very good point, and we recently installed 2 ET measurement stations in the Fresno area, which is somehow representative of the production of that part of the San Joaquin Valley, the Central Valley. It would be nice to coordinate with you for these. If you guys can identify some representative vineyard, there are somehow high yielding in somehow representative of the trellis system and the soil condition of the Lodi region, so District 11, we will sure be happy to install 1 or 2 additional ET measurement in order to come up for a specific crop coefficient value, set of values for the District 11. That's for sure. We can coordinate this.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like something maybe we can start working on and hopefully get something put into place pretty soon. So that pretty much brings us up to 11:50 right now. Stephanie, you got anything else?
Thank you so much. I love this question and answer session. I think we got a lot out of it, and I really appreciate everyone keeping the presentations time so that we would still have time for this. And we'll definitely make this happen again on May 13th for our 3rd workshop in this series. I did just want to thank all of our lovely experts and John for putting this together for you all, and thank the audience for being so engaged. We can tell the engagement levels on the back end, and you were a great audience. We really appreciate it and hope you got a lot out of this. We will be posting on Monday a new blog at lodigrowers.com that's talking about the drought conditions, and that blog is written by Western Weather. So we asked, kind of all these discussions brought up the point that we probably needed to get some extra information on that. So that'll be posted this Monday at lodigrowers.com. And we hope to see everyone on our 3rd workshop on May 13th. Thank you all. Have a great week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.